I'm Ken Record, and I'm happy to be back with you this week on Mining Biblical Truth, where we continue in our series on the book by Christopher Watkin called Biblical Critical Theory, which I strongly encourage you to read and study. This week, we're covering chapters 12 and 13 on prophecy. And chapter 12 is prophecy and power. Prophets speak truth and wisdom from the margins of power, often at personal risk. Truth comes not from the center, but from those outside official circles and authorized channels, quoting Watkin. It reminds me of the jesters in the ancient European courts. As Shakespeare said in the King Lear, jesters do often prove prophets. A satirical comedian today can often get away with speaking truths that others cannot do without penalty, although that's becoming less and less true in the United States. Studying the relationship of prophets to kings in the Bible will inform us about cultural engagement, the difference between power and authority, the danger of totalitarianism, and the addictiveness of modern life. So first, Joshua and Judges. Need to say that because that's the rise and fall preceding the era of the kings, the era in which everyone did what was right in their own eyes. The diagram in the lower right shows the cycle of the judges. God sends a judge to rescue, or rather, a period of peace occurs under a judge. People turn from God. God judges by delivering the people to their enemies. The people turn back to God, and then God sends a new judge to rescue the people. After the incomplete conquest of the land under Joshua, Israel spirals downward due to rejecting the Lord as their king, even though he had delivered them from their enemies in the promised land where he provided judges to administer the law. Now, Samuel is a transitional figure. He's both priest, prophet, judge, and a king anointer. Samuel was an adopted son of Eli, chosen by God as a replacement. The people demand a king, quote, like all the other nations, unquote. In fact, they were rejecting God as their king. Like the Tower of Babel, the people seek to make a name for themselves through their king. In Kings and Chronicles, we have an unflattering, frank account of a long series of kings who fluctuate. We could call them the good, the bad, and the ugly. This degree of self-criticism is not like the official history books of other nations, which speaks to the authenticity of his history in the Bible. So, who makes whose name great is the question, and it echoes back to Babel. Samuel prophesies the disaster of human kings as a replacement for God. The prophecy is fulfilled in the first king, Saul, who Watkin describes as a, quote, divine, I told you so, unquote. So God has Samuel anoint a shepherd boy as Saul's successor. What follows is a deja vu of the relationship earlier seen between Laban and Jacob. Jacob serving an evil and unpredictable master is the relationship of David to Saul. God makes a name for kings rather than kings making a name for God. David offers to build a temple for Yahweh, who declines via the prophet Nathan, only to promise David a continual dynasty leading to the Messiah. It's another example of quote, God himself will provide, unquote. This is an echo of the Akedah that we talked about last week in Genesis 22. Now, kings do not have absolute power. The biblical model of reliance on keeping God's law subverts every other type of human claim on power. God commanded the kings to write out their own copy of the laws given by God, not write their own laws. Unfortunately, there's no record that any of them actually did that, although some had the law read aloud to the people, like King Josiah. Kings administer justice. They don't define justice. All rulers or political leaders should have a dual covenant, a covenant with God and a covenant with the people. Proverbs 21:1 says, "The heart of the king is like a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will." The Lord's sovereignty, his blessings and curses are not limited to Israel, but apply to all nations. Throughout the biblical account of history, God uses Gentile kings and nations for his ultimate purposes, raising them up and bringing them down. Psalm 86:9 says, "All nations shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name." Eventually. And Hebrews 1:1 says, "Long ago God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through his prophets." So prophets could be characterized as poets, persuaders, and performers. Some were a combination of these, and some were mainly one or the other. They were utilizing powerful stories, punctuating satire, and potty humor sometimes. Terry Linval says, "God mocks to remake and reconcile." Unlike false prophets or charlatans, they do not employ magic or read the stars or cards. They claim no special wisdom of their own, but only that God has spoken to them. The best definition of the prophets that I have found is calling them covenant enforcement officers. I like that because it covers a broad range of roles. Prophecy, power, and authority. Unlike the dynasties of the kings, there is no line of prophets, no father-son prophetic legacy. The only prophet with a named prodigy is Elijah with the prodigy Elisha. God's choices are diverse, from lowly shepherds to nobility and including women. Prophets should have been viewed as the British view the party out of power in Parliament as the loyal opposition. Unfortunately, frequently, the kings of Israel did not treat them that way. They treated them as being disloyal. Prophecy, consent, and dignity. Unlike the medieval jester, the prophets were not limited to the royal court, but most often spoke in public because their purpose was to encourage an educated populace. Because God's covenant is not just with the king, but with all the people. Now, this idea of encouraging an educated populace used to be the paradigm of the goal of government in the United States. Unfortunately, just the opposite is now true. Human dignity, everyone counts. And it's all the truth for all the people all the time because they deserve the truth. Prophecy, oppression, and responsibility. All consent to be governed just as the Israelites consented to the covenant. Therefore, all are held responsible. Neither the oppressed nor the oppressors are free from God's condemnation. God judges the behavior of all. One's social standing has no effect on judgment on sin in either direction, neither more harsh on the oppressor nor less harsh for the oppressed. My take is this is the opposite of critical race theory, which seeks to punish the progeny of the oppressors of the past as revenge by the oppressed. Prophecy and time. While God's prophecies are always true, they don't always come true, because if a warning is heeded, then the consequences can be suspended by God's mercy. For instance, via Jonah, God gave Nineveh 40 days, but they repented and were spared, much to Jonah's chagrin. But Jonah testified it was his fear that God would be merciful to their enemy. And then we have the idea of progressive fulfillment. This is a vital concept. Not all prophecies are one-off events. They can have preliminary and later fulfillments, with the latter fulfillment usually being a greater fulfillment. 3 stages of fulfillment are proposed. 1, fulfillment in the history of Israel. 2, fulfillment in the incarnation, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus the Messiah. And 3, in Messiah's second coming in the new heaven and new earth. This is why the initial fulfillment may not include all aspects of a given prophecy. The prophet brings the future into the present, the eschatological, the end time, into the temporal. Prophets make the future real now. As covenant enforcers, prophets are the ultimate cultural or social critics, because the critique comes from our Creator, who sees all. So think about it. If God sent a prophet to your country today, what do you think his message would be? And now moving on to chapter 13, a continuation of prophecy and cultural critique. The practice of self-criticism. When prophets accuse the people of sin, they include themselves, as Isaiah did when he recognized that he was a part of a people of unclean lips. Christianity among religions is uniquely self-critical. Christianity fostered the practice of religious critique, which has now been turned against it. Charles Taylor says all religion is ultimately Moloch drinking blood from the skulls of the slain, describing modern religious critics. Many of today's religious and social critics are copying the methods of the biblical prophets. For example, climate activists, the extremely young and inexperienced Greta Thunberg, is a performance prophet, acting like Ezekiel. Watkin describes these modern prophets as presenting a, quote, reductive, shriveled copy of full-blown biblical criticism, unquote. And then idolatry and ideology. It is not the belief, item, person, or entity that is idolatrous. It is our attitude towards it, that we can't live without it or have significance without it. Watkin calls idolatry disordered love. In Psalm 115:8 says, those who make them become just like them, putting their trust in them. In idolatry, slavery, and emancipation. Your idol becomes your ultimate measure of what is good. The only escape from idolatry is to have an object of worship outside the space-time domain, something supernatural. Jesus died for you, therefore we should live for him. Idolatry and disenchantment. Modern pluralism is not really pure atheism, but rather polytheism, to echo the mantra of the book of the Judges. Everyone worships what is right in their own eyes. In our market-oriented psychology, we don't just buy products, we buy a brand with which we feel a spiritual connection. The brand, in effect, defines us. Idolatry and the heretical imperative. Why is the term idolatry seldom used outside of Christian groups? There's no distinction between true and false worship when all types of worship are considered good, or at least acceptable. The heretical imperative is the societal command. You choose, and we celebrate whatever you choose. In the United States, we used to be united by faith, but we're now one faith no longer. But our faith is redefined by culture. Watkin describes how society has redefined faith as solely existing in the category of values, not of facts. Therefore, values and faith are private, and only facts can be considered public. My take on this is that it seems that the point is that just like a woke person can make assumptions about me that define who I am, they can also make assumptions that define my faith. Because personal feelings are sacred, their personal feelings about either me or my faith cannot be questioned. People have the power to both define themselves and to define others, which is a paradox. So there's an illusion here that people can be divided into those with faith and those without faith. In reality, all people have faith in someone, something, or some ideology. You simply have to identify what your faith is in. So we can be united by Christian faith, or we be disunited by absence of Christian faith. When you look at the alternatives, the other things you could have faith in, they almost all, or at least I can't think of any that unite us. They all tend to disunite us. Walker Percy says, without faith, people perish, and they are perishing before our eyes. Division and exile. God prophesied exile of his people if they failed to worship him. Exile threatened the very identity of the Israelites as God's people in a promised land. However, God brings them back, albeit chastened and grateful, but also sad for those who recall their past glory. The result was both shouting and weeping in Ezra 3:13. And so embracing exile is living faithfully as God's unique people in the world. When we're exiled, we still need to live in faith and try to be a blessing to the people that we're in servitude to. So think about it. If someone objects to your Christian faith being public, what do you think they would say if you responded, if I were to tell you to keep your spiritual beliefs or worldview private, you would accuse me of oppression? How is your command not oppression of my truths about life? Only one of us will ultimately be proven correct. So don't others have an inherent right to hear both sides and decide for themselves? Let's go, Lord, in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for the prophets. Thank you for the example we have of the many prophecies and how they have come true, and the ones we look forward to coming true in the future. Help us, Lord, to put our trust in you and in your prophecies, and not in our idols, and guide us in our interaction with culture on these issues of faith. In Jesus' name, amen. As usual, we invite you to, we'd love to have you comment on YouTube or privately at info@BibleMining.org. And please share with a friend if you're so inclined. And as always, have a blessed week.